My name is Clara, and I'm speaking to you today from a place that was once the subject of ridicule for my entire family and indeed the entire county. They called it Hawthorne's Folly. Today, it's the reason any of them still have a home. I never expected that my quiet little rebellion, my simple purchase of a patch of useless dirt, would end up being the sweetest and most profound revenge against a world that told me my only value lay in a pretty dress and a wealthy husband. It's a long story, but it's one I think is worth telling. Before I dive into exactly how a few acres of stubborn soil changed everything, I want to say hello to everyone watching. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you've ever been underestimated or had your dreams dismissed as foolish, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And for anyone new here, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on more stories about finding strength when everyone else expects you to fail. It all began, as these things so often do, with a death and a small inheritance. My great aunt Mildred passed away, leaving me a sum of money that felt to me like a fortune. It wasn't enough to buy a grand estate or live a life of leisure, but it was a transformative amount. It was enough for a choice. Mildred had been much like me, practical, quiet, more interested in the patterns of migrating birds than in the latest gossip from London. Her legacy felt less like a windfall and more like a responsibility, a quiet nod of encouragement from beyond the grave. My mother and my younger sister, Isabella, saw it differently. To them, the money was not a responsibility, it was a golden ticket. Isabella was everything I was not. Where I was thoughtful, she was vivacious. Where my hands were perpetually smudged with ink from my journals or soil from the garden, hers were perfectly manicured, ready to accept a dance card. She was the family beauty, the one on whom all our social aspirations were pinned. My mother, a woman whose own ambitions had been thwarted by a modest marriage, now lived vicariously through her younger daughter. The day the solicitor's letter arrived, our modest drawing room, usually a quiet space of faded chintz and silent judgment, buzzed with an energy I hadn't felt in years. "Clara, this is it," my mother exclaimed, her hands fluttering over the letter as if it might take flight. "This is our chance. A full season in London. The gowns we can have made, the introductions we can secure. Isabella, my love, you'll be the belle of the ball." Isabella's eyes, a brilliant, hopeful blue, shone. A London season, truly. Oh, Mama, think of it. The dances, the parties, her gaze drifted off, lost in a fantasy of glittering chandeliers and handsome, titled men. I watched them, a familiar ache settling in my chest. In their vision of the future, I was merely the financier, the quiet, plain older sister whose windfall would be sacrificed on the altar of her siblings' social success. It was a role I had played my entire life, in smaller ways. My new book would be set aside to help Isabella hem a dress. My long walks to collect botanical specimens would be canceled to allow me to chaperone her at a local tea. My desires were always secondary, considered trivial, a little odd. For weeks, their plans consumed our home. Pattern books and fabric swatches covered every surface. Conversations were a dizzying litany of names, dukes, viscounts, and barons, who were, according to my mother, just waiting for a girl with Isabella's beauty to grace the city. They spoke of my inheritance as our money, a collective fund for Project Isabel. I tried to voice my own thoughts, but they were dismissed with a wave of a hand. "Don't be a dreary goose, Clara. This is for the good of the family." But while they dreamt of satin and pearls, I was dreaming of something else. For years, I had been secretly devouring every agricultural pamphlet and scientific journal I could get my hands on. While polite society debated the merits of this poet or that painter, I was reading about crop rotation, soil composition, and the revolutionary ideas of men who believed farming could be a science, not just a tradition. I had notebooks filled with theories, with sketches of irrigation systems, with lists of hardy vegetable varietals from the continent. My dream wasn't a ballroom, it was a laboratory made of earth. And then I found it, a small notice in the local paper for a plot of land being sold cheaply. The Old Miller's Rise, it was called. Everyone knew it. It was a patch of about 20 acres considered utterly useless. It sat on a strange rocky incline, its soil thin and acidic. It was too steep for easy plowing, and too exposed to the wind. For generations, it had been a place for sheep to graze poorly, and for local legend to plant tales of stubborn, unyielding earth. The locals called it the folly. I walked the land myself one afternoon, the wind whipping my hair across my face. I crumbled the soil in my hands. It was poor, yes, but not impossible. I saw the way the water ran, the pockets of shelter offered by the rocky outcrops. I saw potential where everyone else saw failure. It was a reflection of how I felt about myself. I made my decision. That inheritance was not ours, it was mine. It was Mildred's gift to me, and I would use it to build something, not to buy something. The evening I chose to tell them, the air was thick with the scent of lavender from the sachets my mother was preparing for their imagined London luggage. They were in high spirits, Isabella twirling in a mock waltz around the room. I cleared my throat. "Mother, Isabella, I need to speak with you." They stopped, their smiles faltering at my serious tone. "What is it, Clara? You look as though you've swallowed a toad." "I'm not going to be funding a London season," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've made another investment." My mother's face went blank. "Another investment? What are you talking about? What could possibly be more important than securing your sister's future?" I took a deep breath. "I've purchased the old Miller's Rise plot." The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than any shouting could have been. Isabella was the first to break it, a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Miller's Rise? You mean that worthless patch of rocks? Hawthorne's Folly? That's your investment?" "It's not worthless," I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. "I have plans, theories I want to test, new farming techniques." My mother cut me off, her voice dangerously low. "Farming? You have squandered your sister's one chance in life for dirt." The word dripped with contempt. "You choose dirt over a duke, over the honor and advancement of your own family?" "It's my money," I whispered, the words feeling small and insufficient against her towering rage. "Your money?" she scoffed. "And what of your duty? What of your sister? Look at her, Clara." Isabella was openly weeping now, her beautiful face crumpled in despair. "You've been jealous of her your entire life, and now you've taken a cruel, bizarre revenge. You're ruining her life because you're too afraid, too plain, to go and live your own." The accusation struck me like a physical blow. Jealous? Was I? Perhaps a part of me was jealous of how easily the world seemed to open up for her, of the effortless way she commanded attention. But this decision wasn't about her. It was about me. It was the first decision in my 26 years that was truly, entirely about me. "This isn't about jealousy," I said, my voice gaining a little strength. "This is about building something real, something that will last longer than a season of dances." "You will be a spinster," my mother hissed, her final, damning judgment. "A lonely, peculiar woman playing in the mud on your hill of rocks. A laughingstock. Don't you dare come to us when you are ruined and alone." The next day, I signed the papers. The chill from my family was immediate and absolute. Meals were eaten in silence. My greetings were ignored. Isabella wouldn't even look at me. The whispers in the village started almost immediately. "Did you hear about Clara Hawthorne? Spent her whole inheritance on the folly." It was a source of great amusement for many. I was the eccentric bluestocking who had finally taken leave of her senses. I was utterly alone. But when I stood on my land, the deed in my pocket, the loneliness was different. It was not the oppressive loneliness of my mother's drawing room. It was a clean, windswept solitude. It was the freedom of a blank page. The work was brutal. I hired a local man, Mr. Giles, a taciturn widower with hands like gnarled oak. He was deeply skeptical of my methods, but was honest and needed the work. His face was a study in disbelief as I instructed him to help me dig deep trenches, not for planting, but to fill with layers of gravel, sand, and then topsoil to improve drainage in one of the soggier sections. "Begging your pardon, miss," he'd grumble, wiping sweat from his brow, "but we're moving a powerful lot of earth for no good reason I can see." "There's a reason, Mr. Giles," I'd reply, my own back aching. "We're teaching the water where to go." He would just shake his head and keep digging. I spent my days clearing stones, my hands blistering and then callousing. I built a small, sturdy cottage with my own hands, with Mr. Giles's help on the heavy beams. It was nothing more than 2 rooms and a hearth, but it was mine. Every evening, covered in grime and exhausted to my bones, I would light a single candle and write in my journal. I documented everything: the soil's pH, the rainfall, the angle of the sun. And I documented my feelings too, the gnawing doubt that crept in during the dead of night. My mother's words would echo in the silent cottage, ruined and alone. My first attempt at a wheat crop was a disaster. The stalks grew thin and pale before withering completely. The drainage ditch we'd spent weeks digging overflowed in a freak storm, washing away a bed of carefully planted seedlings. For a full day, I sat on my porch, staring at the muddy ruin, and allowed myself to despair. What if they were right? What if this was all a terrible, arrogant mistake? What if I really had thrown everything away for nothing? The temptation to give up, to sell the land for a pittance and beg my family's forgiveness, was a physical weight. But then I remembered Mildred. I remembered her quiet confidence, the way she had lived her life on her own terms, finding joy in small, tangible things. I stood up, put on my boots, and went back out into the mud. I analyzed my failures with the same dispassion as I had planned my successes. The wheat had failed because the soil lacked nitrogen. The ditch had overflowed because I hadn't accounted for the runoff from the highest rocky outcrop. These weren't signs from God that I was doomed. They were simply data, problems to be solved. I changed my approach. I divided the land into smaller, manageable plots. On the failed wheat field, I planted clover, a nitrogen-fixing legume that would replenish the soil. I reinforced the ditch with a stone retaining wall. And in a small, sheltered patch near the cottage, I began my kitchen garden. I mixed the poor native soil with compost I had been meticulously creating from kitchen scraps and chicken manure. I planted radishes, lettuces, and a particularly hardy variety of peas I'd read about. And then, a small miracle. Tiny green shoots pushed their way through the dark, amended earth. They grew strong and vibrant. One glorious morning, I pulled the first radish from the ground. It was perfect, crisp, crimson, and peppery. I sat on my back step and ate it right there, dirt and all. It tasted of victory. It was a small, almost insignificant triumph in the grand scheme of things, but it was enough. It was proof. Something could grow here. Hope, I realized, could be cultivated just like anything else. It just required the right conditions and a great deal of stubborn work. The seasons turned. My little patch of success widened. The clover flourished, and when I tilled it back into the earth, the soil became richer, darker. The following planting of wheat was not bountiful, but it was viable. My vegetable garden expanded, providing me with more than enough to eat. I experimented constantly. I planted rows of marigolds and lavender among my cabbages to deter pests, a practice Mr. Giles found particularly baffling. Flowers in the vegetable patch, miss, ain't natural. Nature is more clever than we give it credit for, Mr. Giles, I would tell him. I built a small greenhouse against the sunniest wall of my cottage, using glass panes I'd bought cheap from a hailstorm-damaged manor. In it, I nurtured delicate herbs and started my seedlings early. I was learning the unique language of my plot of land, its moods, its weaknesses, its surprising strengths. My life fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the soil, and for the first time I felt a sense of peace. The scorn of the village faded into background noise. My family's silence became a comfortable quiet. Their world of social calls and anxieties seemed a universe away. I was no longer just surviving on my folly. I was beginning to thrive. It was late in the summer of my second year on the land that the first whispers began. They came from the east, carried by traveling merchants and gossiping servants. A strange sickness was affecting the potato crops. Fields that were healthy one day were a black, rotting sludge the next. It was being called the blight. Here in our prosperous corner of the county, the great landowners were dismissive. Lord Pemberton, our most powerful and traditional aristocrat, declared it was nothing more than a bout of damp weather and the result of lazy farming by tenant farmers. Proper English soil, managed in the proper English way, is immune to such foreign maladies, he announced at the local market, to the sycophantic nods of his peers. But the blight didn't respect tradition. It spread like a dark tide, relentless and fast. It reached the neighboring counties, then the estates bordering our own. The smell of it preceded it, a foul, sweetish odor of decay that hung in the air on damp mornings. Then it was upon us. It was as swift and as devastating as the rumors had promised. One week, the vast potato fields that carpeted the valleys were lush and green. The next, they were blackened, skeletal remains. The devastation was total. For the wealthy landowners, it was a financial catastrophe. For the tenant farmers and laborers who depended on the potato as their primary source of food, it was a death sentence. A palpable panic began to grip the region. On my hill, I watched and waited, my heart in my throat. I had planted potatoes, but not in a monoculture like the great estates. I had several small plots, interspersed with my other crops. I had chosen 3 different varietals, including a hardy one from the Americas that I had spent a considerable sum to import, one rumored to be more resistant to rot. I had also, following a theory I'd read in a French journal, sprayed my leaves with a weak copper sulfate solution after every rain. Mr. Giles had thought I was mad, poisoning my own crop. Every morning I would walk my fields, dreading the sight of the telltale black spots, but my plants remained stubbornly, miraculously green. While the world around me succumbed to decay, my small, isolated ecosystem held firm. My diverse planting had created natural fire breaks against the spread of the airborne fungus. The amended, well-drained soil prevented the spores from thriving. The specific varietals I'd chosen, along with my chemical precautions, were working. My folly was untouched. News of my family's situation reached me through a grim-faced Mr. Giles. The small farm they owned, worked by tenants, was completely wiped out. Their primary source of income was gone. My first instinct was a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly followed by a weary resignation. I knew they would not see this as a shared tragedy. They would see it only through the lens of their own thwarted ambitions. Sure enough, they arrived a week later. I saw their carriage winding its way up my rough-hewn track. I didn't go out to greet them. I stood on my porch, wiping my hands on my apron, and waited. My mother and Isabella stepped out of the carriage, their fine dresses looking absurdly out of place against the backdrop of my rustic cottage and thriving fields. Their faces were pinched with worry, but as their eyes took in the scene, the vibrant green of my potato plants, the heavy-laden bean poles, the flourishing squash vines, their expressions shifted. It wasn't relief or pride. It was a stunned, resentful disbelief. "Clara," my mother said, her voice tight, "we heard rumors. It seems you've been spared." "My methods are sound," I replied simply. Isabella walked to the edge of the nearest potato plot, peering at the healthy leaves as if they were a personal affront. "How is this possible? Lord Pemberton's entire estate is ruined. Everyone is ruined. It's not fair." "It has nothing to do with fairness, Isabella. It has to do with soil science and crop diversity." My mother let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, please, Clara, don't start with your tedious lectures. It's luck, a complete and utter fluke. You happen to buy a freakish patch of land. That's all." She was so desperate not to concede that I might have been right, that my foolishness might have been foresight. To admit that would be to admit her own catastrophic misjudgment. They hadn't come to see if I was well. They hadn't come to ask for help. They had come to confirm that my ruin was as complete as theirs, and when they found it wasn't, their only response was jealousy. They stayed for less than 10 minutes, the conversation stilted and sour, before retreating back to their world of decay, leaving me in my isolated oasis of green. It was a few days after their visit that another, far more impressive carriage made its way up my lane. This one was sleek and black, bearing a crest I recognized as belonging to the Earl of Northwood. The Earl, Lord Alistair Finch, was something of an enigma in the county. He was young, titled, and enormously wealthy, yet he rarely participated in the local social scene. He spent most of his time in London at meetings of the Royal Society, or so the gossip went, and was said to have turned a wing of his ancestral home, Northwood Manor, into a vast laboratory. He was known as the Progressive Earl, a title used with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. A tall, lean man with sharp, intelligent eyes and an unruly shock of dark hair stepped out. He was dressed not in the finery of an earl, but in practical, sturdy country clothes. He approached me, not with the condescending air of an aristocrat visiting a tenant, but with the focused curiosity of a fellow scientist. "Miss Hawthorne," he asked, his voice a pleasant baritone. "I am Northwood. Forgive the intrusion, but I've been hearing the most astonishing reports. Every field in the county is lost, and yet here we are." His gaze swept over my fields, and I saw in his eyes the same thing I felt, a deep, abiding fascination with the how and why of the natural world. I was momentarily struck dumb. No one of his station had ever sought me out, let alone spoken to me as an equal. I found my voice. "Lord Finch, welcome to my experiment." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his serious face. "An experiment. Exactly. May I?" He gestured towards the fields. For the next 2 hours we walked. He didn't ask about luck. He didn't comment on the peculiarity of a woman running a farm. He asked intelligent, specific questions. He crumbled the soil in his fingers, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Extraordinary aeration. This isn't the native soil, is it? You've amended it significantly. Bone meal? Peat?" "Compost, mostly," I found myself explaining, my initial nervousness melting away under the warmth of his genuine interest. "And I tilled in 2 seasons of nitrogen-fixing clover." He knelt by my potato plants. "And these aren't the common local stock. Peruvian purple, I believe. And that one looks like a French fingerling. Where did you source them?" "From a specialist importer in London. I read a paper suggesting their genetic diversity might make them more resilient." "And you've applied a fungicide," he noted, lightly touching a leaf. "Copper sulfate?" "In a weak solution. After every rainfall," I confirmed. He stood up, looking from the fields to me, and his expression was one of pure, unadulterated admiration. He saw my detailed journals, my charts of rainfall and growth, my carefully labeled seed packets. He saw the science behind the success. He looked at me, his eyes alight with intellectual excitement. "Miss Hawthorne, this is not a farm," he said, his voice filled with a reverence that stunned me. "This is a laboratory, and you are not a farmer. You are a scientist. This is, without exaggeration, the most brilliant piece of applied agricultural science I have ever seen." In that moment, something inside me that had been clenched tight for years began to unfurl, to be seen, truly seen, for what I was and what I had done. It was a more powerful tonic than any harvest. He didn't see a curiosity, an oddity, or a spinster. He saw a peer. The news that the Earl of Northwood had spent an entire afternoon at Hawthorne's Folly and had declared it a work of genius spread through the county faster than the blight ever had. The tenor of the whispers changed overnight. I was no longer the village eccentric. I was a savant, a miracle worker. The same neighbors who had mocked me now tipped their hats as I passed in my cart. Local farmers, their faces etched with desperation, began to appear at my gate, asking for advice, for seed potatoes, for anything. My family's reaction was predictable. They saw the Earl's attention not as a validation of my work, but as a glittering social opportunity for them. My mother suddenly found endless reasons to suggest I invite Lord Finch for tea, with Isabella, of course, prominently on display. She saw his interest in my potatoes as a bizarre but convenient entry point into the highest echelons of society. The irony that the dirt she had so reviled was now her best and only social currency was entirely lost on her. She couldn't comprehend that Alistair was interested in my mind, not my connections. The battle had been won, but I had a sinking feeling the war was far from over. The invitation arrived by courier, a thick, cream-colored card embossed with the Northwood crest. It was addressed solely to me, Miss Clara Hawthorne. Lord Alistair Finch requested my presence at an urgent meeting of the county's landowners to be held at his manor. The purpose, it stated, was to discuss a collaborative strategy to combat the blight and avert the impending economic collapse of the entire region. At the bottom, in Alistair's own hand, was a short, personal note. "Your expertise will be the most valuable contribution of the day. I would be deeply grateful for your attendance. When I showed the invitation to my mother, her eyes lit up with a feverish ambition I knew all too well. Northwood Manor. Clara, this is it. This is the moment we've been waiting for. I have been invited, Mother, I stated, emphasizing the pronoun, to speak about my work. Nonsense. She waved away my point as if it were a bothersome fly. It's a social event, a gathering. We will all attend. It is the perfect opportunity for Isabella to finally make an impression on the Earl. He has this peculiar interest in your hobby, but once he sees Isabella in a proper setting, his attentions will naturally turn in the proper direction. I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I am not a hobbyist, and I am not your key to the Earl's drawing room. I am going as a scientific consultant. But arguing was useless. It was like reasoning with a tidal wave. On the day of the meeting, my home was thrown into a state of chaos. My mother and Isabella descended upon my wardrobe, clucking with disapproval at my practical, earth-toned dresses. They insisted I wear a pale blue muslin gown of Isabella's, one that was too tight in the shoulders and entirely unsuited for anything other than sitting prettily. They fussed with my hair, trying to tame it into fashionable curls, and lectured me relentlessly on etiquette. Now, Clara, when you are introduced, you must be modest, my mother instructed, pulling my corset strings tighter. Smile, but not too broadly. Speak of your little farm as a blessing, a spot of good fortune. Men do not appreciate a blue stocking. Let the Earl think he is the one discovering the solutions, with a little help from your womanly intuition. My intuition has nothing to do with it, I said through gritted teeth. My success is based on empirical data. Don't use words like that, she snapped. You will frighten him off. Isabella, my dear, you will be charming. Ask him about his horses. Men of his station always appreciate a lady who understands horses. Isabella, looking radiant in a new gown of rose-colored silk, nodded eagerly, her mind already at the manor, charming the Earl. They saw my moment of professional triumph as nothing more than a stage for their own romantic and social theater. We arrived at Northwood Manor in a state of armed truce. The great hall was a cavernous, wood-paneled room filled with the somber, anxious faces of the county's landed gentry. The air was thick with despair and the smell of old money fearing its own demise. Men stood in small, grim clusters, their voices low and urgent. Lord Pemberton, his face florid and angry, was loudly blaming the government, the weather, the phase of the moon, anything but his own outdated farming practices. Alistair met us at the door. He greeted my mother and sister with perfect, cool courtesy, but his eyes, warm and encouraging, were for me. Clara, he said, taking my hand, I'm so glad you could come. Everyone is waiting to hear from you. He led me towards the front of the room, leaving my mother and Isabella standing awkwardly by the entrance, their grand social entrance completely preempted. He called the meeting to order, his voice cutting through the anxious murmurs. He laid out the stark reality of their situation, the catastrophic crop failures, the looming bankruptcies, the threat of famine among the tenantry. He then turned his gaze to me. However, he said, his voice ringing with confidence, we are fortunate to have one person among us who has not been defeated, one person who met this challenge not with tradition, but with innovation. I have asked Miss Clara Hawthorne to share her findings with us. A wave of whispers and skeptical looks washed over the room. Lord Pemberton let out a loud, theatrical scoff. A woman? You've brought us a spinster with a vegetable patch to solve our problems, Northwood. Have you taken leave of your senses? My heart hammered against my ribs, but as I walked to the front of the hall, clutching my precious journals, a strange calm settled over me. I had the truth on my side. I had the data. I placed my journals on the large oak table, opened to a page with a detailed diagram of my crop rotation system. I looked out at the sea of doubtful, male faces, and I began to speak. My voice, at first, was quiet, but it grew in strength as I laid out my methods. I didn't speak of luck or intuition. I spoke of science. I explained the role of nitrogen in soil fertility. I described how the fungal spores of the blight traveled on the wind and thrived in damp, poorly drained soil. I presented my research on different potato varietals and the chemical properties of a copper sulfate solution. I unrolled charts showing my yields compared to the county average, which was, of course, 0. I could feel the mood in the room shifting. Skepticism gave way to grudging interest, then to focused attention. Men were leaning forward, stroking their chins. A few even began to take notes. I was winning them over, not with charm, but with facts. I was in the middle of explaining the importance of biodiversity when my mother's voice, high and saccharine, cut through the hall. "My daughter is ever so modest, my lords," she trilled, stepping forward from the side of the room. Isabella followed in her wake, positioning herself to be in the Earl's line of sight. "She has a true woman's intuition for the land. A gift, you see, and of course, she has been blessed with a great deal of luck." The momentum I had built shattered. The focus of the room was broken. Several of the men relaxed, chuckling softly, relieved to have this uncomfortable display of female intellect reframed into something familiar and dismissible, feminine mystique, and dumb luck. Isabella seized the moment, turning a dazzling smile on Alistair. "It must be so tiresome for you, my lord, to have to think about all these dreary agricultural matters." It was a perfectly executed maneuver, designed to undermine my credibility and reposition their family, with Isabella at its head, as the true prize. I froze, the words dying in my throat. All my hard work, my years of study and labor, were being erased in an instant, dismissed as a parlor trick by my own mother. For a moment, the old Clara, the one who deferred and disappeared, almost took over. I could feel myself shrinking. Then I saw Alistair's face. He was looking at my mother with an expression of cold fury, and in his eyes I saw my own worth reflected back at me. I was not a hobbyist. I was not lucky. I was a scientist. I drew myself up to my full height. The room fell silent, sensing a new current in the air. I looked directly at my mother, my voice not loud, but clear and carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "It was not luck," I said. The words hung in the air, sharp and precise. I turned my gaze from her to the assembled landowners. "And it was not intuition, it was observation, it was hypothesis, it was experimentation, and it was 3 years of relentless back-breaking work. What saved my farm was not magic, it was knowledge." Before anyone could respond, before my mother could formulate another platitude, Alistair stood up, his tall frame commanding the attention of everyone in the hall. He stood beside me, a silent, powerful show of solidarity. "Miss Hawthorne is correct," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Her work represents the future of English agriculture. It is the application of reason and science to a problem that superstition and tradition have utterly failed to solve." He then turned his piercing gaze directly on my mother and sister. "We are not here today to discuss luck or to flatter our own ignorance. We are here to learn from the only person in this room who has demonstrated a viable solution. Your interruption, madam, is both unwelcome and unhelpful." The public rebuke was devastating. My mother's face went white, then a deep, mottled red. Isabella looked as though she had been slapped. They were rendered utterly speechless, their social ambitions crumbling into public humiliation. The spell was broken. Lord Pemberton sat back in his chair, his mouth clamped shut. Alistair turned back to me. "Please, Miss Hawthorne," he said gently, "continue. We are all listening." And I did. I continued my presentation, my voice filled with a newfound authority. When I finished, the silence was replaced by a cacophony of voices. The landowners, their arrogance and skepticism washed away by the tide of their desperation, crowded around me. They were no longer sneering, they were pleading. "Miss Hawthorne, how can we amend our soil? Where can we source these seeds? Would you be willing to consult for us?" I stood there, my journals in hand, calmly answering their questions. I was no longer Hawthorne's folly. I was the architect of their salvation. And across the room, on the sidelines, my mother and sister stood alone, utterly ignored, their London dreams turned to dust in a hall that smelled of fear, dirt, and progress. The carriage ride back to my cottage was a study in suffocating silence. The air was so thick with resentment, I felt I could barely breathe. My mother sat ramrod straight, staring out at the blighted fields we passed, her face a mask of cold fury. Isabel huddled in her corner, quietly weeping into a lace handkerchief. They did not speak until the carriage had pulled up to my small home. As I stepped out, my mother's voice, sharp as broken glass, finally broke the silence. I hope you're pleased with yourself, Clara. You deliberately, cruelly made us look like fools. You made yourselves look like fools, I replied, my voice weary but firm. I turned to face them, the evening light casting long shadows across the yard. You tried to speak for me. You tried to diminish my work and use me as a stepping stone. I am not a child, and I am not a tool. I am perfectly capable of speaking for myself. Isabella looked up, her face tear-streaked and confused. But it was for the family, for my future. Your future cannot be built upon the erasure of mine, I said. The words came out with a clarity that surprised even me. A boundary, solid and clear, had finally been drawn. I saw not hatred in their eyes, but a dawning, horrified understanding that the dynamic that had governed our lives had been irrevocably shattered. They were no longer in control. I watched them drive away, and for the first time I felt no guilt, only a profound and quiet relief. In the weeks that followed, my life transformed. Alistair and I became partners, not just in theory, but in practice. He proposed the formation of a county-wide consortium, pooling resources to implement my methods on a massive scale. We established a seed bank using my resilient potatoes and other crops as the foundation. I found myself in a role I had never imagined, a leader. I hired and trained teams of workers, including a now deeply respectful Miss Giles, to go from estate to estate, teaching the principles of soil amendment and crop diversification. I drafted contracts, managed budgets, and stood in muddy fields arguing with stubborn farm managers twice my age and size, and I won those arguments because I had the results to prove my case. I was earning an income that dwarfed my original inheritance, but more importantly, I was earning a deep and satisfying respect that was based entirely on my own merit. One afternoon, my mother and sister appeared at my cottage again. They looked diminished, their fine clothes slightly worn. Their own finances, I knew, were in ruins, and their social standing was gone. They came bearing a basket of jam and a stilted, awkward apology. "We always knew you were clever, Clara, dear," my mother began, unable to meet my eyes. "We were just worried, a woman alone, you know. We were wrong to interfere." It was a clumsy, transparently self-serving attempt at reconciliation. They were not sorry for how they had treated me. They were sorry their plans had failed. The old Clara would have accepted the apology eagerly, desperate for a crumb of familial affection. But I was not the old Clara. I looked at them, and I felt not anger, but a kind of pity. I did not offer them forgiveness, not the easy absolution-granting kind, but I did not turn them away. "Thank you for the jam," I said politely. I poured them tea, and we spoke of practical matters. I offered to buy their blighted farmland at a fair market price, to be incorporated into the consortium's work. I offered my mother a loan to settle her debts. It was a business transaction, not a family reunion. I would help them, because it was the practical, decent thing to do, but I would not allow them back into the vulnerable places in my heart. They accepted my terms with a humbled gratitude that told me they, too, understood the new order of things. My partnership with Alistair deepened with every passing day. We spent our evenings not in stilted drawing rooms, but in his laboratory, poring over soil maps, or on my porch, sketching out designs for a more efficient irrigation system. We talked for hours about everything from soil microbes to celestial navigation. He was the first person who had never asked me to be anything other than exactly who I was. One evening, we were in my cottage reviewing the schematics for a large new greenhouse I planned to build. The air was filled with the comfortable silence of two minds working in tandem. He suddenly put down his pencil and turned to me, his expression serious. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet, "my admiration for your work is boundless. You know this, but in the course of our work, I have come to realize that my admiration for your mind is surpassed only by my admiration for your spirit, for your resilience, your integrity, your courage." He reached across the table and took my hand. His was warm and strong. "I have no interest in the debutantes of London. I am not looking for a countess to host parties and decorate my home. I am looking for a partner to challenge me, to build with me, to discover things with me." He looked directly into my eyes, his own earnest and sincere. "I am looking for you, Clara. Will you build a future with me?" It was the most romantic proposal I could have ever imagined. It wasn't offered in a ballroom under the gaze of a gossiping society. It was offered here, in my small, self-made home, over a table littered with plans and dreams. It was a proposal for a partnership of equals, and my answer, of course, was yes. 2 years have passed since that day. The county has healed. The fields that were once black with rot are now a patchwork quilt of green, gold, and purple, planted with the diverse, resilient crops that are now standard practice here. The air no longer smells of decay, it smells of rich earth and possibility. My little cottage still stands, but it is now part of a much larger complex. Hawthorne's Folly has become the Hawthorne Finch Institute for Agricultural Advancement, a leading center for research and education. Alistair provided the funding, but it is my name that is over the door, my vision that guides its work. We held a small ceremony last month to open a new soil testing laboratory. My mother and Isabella were there. Our relationship is a quiet, settled thing now. There is a distance, but it is a respectful one. Isabel is engaged to a kind, steady local doctor, a match made not of ambition, but of genuine affection. She seems happier, more grounded than I have ever seen her. My mother watches me now with a look of grudging awe. She will never fully understand my world, but she has come to respect it. My happiness is no longer dependent on her approval, but it is, I will admit, a quiet satisfaction to have it. Later that evening, Alistair and I walked through the fields behind the Institute as the sun set, casting a golden glow over everything. We are partners in every sense of the word. Our days are a comfortable rhythm of shared work and shared life. Our conversations are still an easy mix of intellectual debate and deep affection. He stopped and pulled me close, his arm around my waist as we looked out over the thriving landscape. "Just think," he murmured into my hair. "All of this exists because you chose a patch of dirt over a London season." I leaned my head against his shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over me. He was right. I had been offered a choice between a pre-made world that demanded I shrink myself to fit and an empty patch of earth that asked only for my ideas and my labor. Choosing the dirt was the most terrifying and the most rewarding decision of my life. The vindication I had found wasn't in proving my family wrong, or in winning an earl, or even in saving the county. The true victory was in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had trusted myself, that I had believed in my own useless ideas, and that I had built a life and a world from the ground up. So much of my story is about the value of trusting your own instincts, even when the world calls you a fool. The greatest validation isn't proving other people wrong, it's proving yourself right. I hope this story can be a little piece of encouragement for anyone out there who feels like their passions are misunderstood or undervalued. What's a dream you've held on to, even when others didn't get it? I'd love to read about it in the comments below. Hearing your stories is what makes this community so special. Please don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about forging your own path. Sharing this with someone who might need to hear it can make a world of difference. Thank you all so much for joining me today and for listening to my journey. Remember, sometimes the most fertile ground for your future is the very place everyone else has written off as worthless.